Good morning, everybody. I would like to make a little contribution to the critical theory and the human condition. The critical theory was, of course, the cover name for Marxism originally. So they were mainly concerned with class problems. But then another problem came up, and these were the race problems in the form of anti-Semitism. But they never really got to the gender problem. So I have extended somehow the critical theory to include the gender problem as well. And I would just like to read a few lines from a lengthy paper on Marx and Freud, Horkheimer and Adorno, beyond the historical gender struggle. So early on, Max Horkheimer, the founder of the critical theory of society on the Frankfurt School, informed by Immanuel Kant and Hegel and Marx and Freud, had personal contact with the Freudian psychoanalysis, essentially concerned with the gender struggle, when he visited as patient the Freudian psychoanalyst and later friend Karl Landauer, who was to help him to speak freely and without notes in the lecture halls of the Johann Wolfgang von Goethe Universität in Frankfurt. The analysis was short because Horkheimer and his beloved wife Maiden were such happy people and thus were no longer in need of treatment by Landauer. A few years later, the Jewish psychoanalyst Landauer was starved to death in the Nazi concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. From the start, Max Horkheimer was, as director of the Institute of Social Research, popularly called the Café Marx, on the campus of the Frankfurt University, in continual touch and contact with the nearly Freudian Psychoanalytical Institute and the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm and Karl Landauer. Later, both institutes merged in one building, the Café Marx, and Fromm became a member of the Institute of Social Research, and Landauer became the director and leader of its psychological department or section. The building was confiscated by the National Socialist Cultural Minister in 1933 and was bombed out by the American Air Force in 1944, 1945, and rebuilt after the war, after World War II, with the financial support of the city of Frankfurt and of the military government of the American occupational zone of Germany. Horkheimer and Fromm combined, like Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Wilhelm Reich, and Alexander and Margaret Mitscherlich, and much later Slavoj Žižek, Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, psychoanalysis and political economics and sociology. Marx, who had no psychology, was supplemented by Freud's psychoanalysis, and Freud, who had no sociology, was complemented by Marx's historical materialism. Horkheimer's Institute of Social Research combined individual and society, personal autonomy, and universal solidarity. The same was true of the critical theory of religion and society, CTRS, or dialectical religiology, which we derived from, including Dussen, derived from Horkheimer's critical theory of society since the end of World War II. For several years, a deep friendship bound together Erich Fromm and only with the existentialist and socialist theologian Paul Tillich, but also with Horkheimer. When Fromm left the Institute of Social Research, which had migrated to the Columbia University in New York from fascist Germany, because of his financial and other reasons, for instance, his revisionism concerning Marx and Freud, that meant for Horkheimer and the Institute the greatest loss in comparison to other scholars who had departed. While Horkheimer was mainly concerned with class and distribution of wealth problems, he was also interested in issues of cultural recognition or respect, like race issues, for instance, anti-Semitism, and generational issues, or gender issues like the battle of the sexes through the centuries. According to CTRS, men and women were located in different classes: nobility, bourgeoisie, proletariat, and civil society. Men may be related closer to women in their own class than to men in a different class. Women may be related closer to men in their own class than to women in a different class. Thus, class struggle and gender struggle may also be interconnected. Men and women did not only need recognition and respect, but also an income in civil society, one equal to that of men. According to DR, that means the dialectical religiology, while Hegel built his gigantic philosophical system on the idea, as well as on all five human potentials: language and memory, work and tool, sexual love, struggle for recognition, and community, his anti-systematic disciple Marx, after giving up his teacher's idea, grounded his dialectical materialism in the evolutionary universal of work and tool, and the likewise anti-systematic systematic Freud based his psychoanalysis on the human potential of sexual love. While Hegel was the greatest idealist, Marx and Freud were materialists. While Friedrich Engels, the friend of Marx, considered all religions to be idealistic, Hegel showed that Christianity was not only idealistic, but also materialistic through the incarnation of the Logos in Jesus of Nazareth. That was true of all positive religions insofar as they all had some kind of an incarnation. Hinduism, the religion of imagination in the Bhagavad Gita, or Judaism, the religion of sublimity in the Torah, or Islam, the religion of law in the Holy Quran. Thus, in 2021 years, there existed in American and European civil society a bourgeois, Marxian and Freudian, as well as a legitimate religious Hindu, Jewish, Islamic, or Christian materialism. Like the Abrahamic religions and German idealism, the anti-systematic Horkheimer united the sense of for reality with the imperturbable holding on to the idea, the very opposite of the reality, and to the insight into the impossibility to imagine or name the absolute or the unconditional. While Freud looked favorably on the Marxist-Leninist revolution going on in Russia in the 1920s, his biological determinism prevented him from becoming a Marxist because of man's aggressive or death instinct. Even if the class struggle would end victoriously with the proletariat, other forms of conflict would continue. For instance, the battle of the sexes, or the races, or the generations, and so on. The critical theory of religion, which was also, like Horkheimer's critical theory of society, based on Kant and Hegel, Marx and Freud, traced the historical development from the original relative union of the genders under the primitive communism of hunters, fishermen, and food gatherers through their antagonism in terms of matriarchy and patriarchy to their possible reunion in terms of not only a formal, but rather a material, egalitarian social democracy of brothers and sisters, not only in civil society and political state and history, but also in the family and in religion. Freud based and concentrated his psychoanalysis and therapy on organism, including form, assimilation, and species process, and on the connected psychic apparatus, including id, ego, and superego, and on the family, including marriage, familial property, and education of children, as the source of the gender conflict between parents and children, father and son, son and father, wife and husband, son and mother, daughter and mother, and so on. The class struggle for equal distribution of the surplus value included the gender conflict, as well as the race struggle and the generational battle for equal cultural recognition and respect, and the environmental fight for species survival on this planet, but not vice versa. Not only women, but also LGBT plus communities participated in the historical gender struggle and fought more and more successfully for gender identity, equality, and justice, while secular as well as religious, exclusive, right-wing, authoritarian, and totalitarian populists continued to consider them to be perverse and decadent expressions of a declining culture and civilization, and to resist them with more or less violent identity policies and politics, as the fascists had done in the first half of the 20th century. Not only Jews, gypsies, and communists, men and women were murdered in the fascist concentration camps in Eastern and Central Europe in the 20th century, but also homosexuals. The Simon Wiesenthal Center reported on June 29, 2021 that the founder, Simon Wiesenthal, was one of the first to discuss what happened to homosexuals before and during the Holocaust, and about the anti-gay edict that the Catholic Heinrich Himmler, the fabricator of the Jewish Shoah, enacted in 1937 in Nazi Berlin. The Simon Wiesenthal Center, usually devoted to the fight against anti-Semitism, remembered nevertheless during the Gay Pride Month, June 21, 2021, those gay men who were persecuted and murdered together with Jews during the Holocaust. The gender struggle was most closely connected not only with the class struggle, but also with the fight of the LGBT plus communities as a whole for equality and justice. The gender struggle took place most passionately, not only in the secular, but also in the religious sphere. Jesuit Father Mitch mentioned in a public discourse with a Hungarian priest in June 2021, in preparation of the Eucharistic Congress in Budapest in August 2021, the terror of communism in Catholic Hungary, and even the dangers of recent neoliberalism for the faith, but forgot completely that Catholic Hungary, like Catholic Spain and Catholic Portugal and Catholic Croatia and Catholic Italy and half Catholic Germany and so on, had also been patriarchal and fascist and anti-Semitic and an ally of Nazi Germany in the Second World War. I personally witnessed 300 Hungarian officers fighting most fanatically with German troops against General Patton's tank army in the Battle of Aschaffenburg on Easter 1945, and that they deserted only when the battle was finally lost. In spite of the fact that here existed an all too late papal encyclical letter which condemned fascism as pagan, no fascist leader was ever excommunicated or deprived of receiving communion. Not only was Adolf Hitler never excommunicated, a mass was even celebrated for him in all German Catholic parishes after he had ordered people to be executed up to his last day, and after he and his wife Eva had committed suicide, both having been educated by Catholic priests and nuns in Austria. All socialists and communists were automatically excommunicated. While the Vatican had concordance with all fascist states, there was no agreement with the Soviet Union. While Catholic communities helped innocent Jews during World War II, the Vatican also helped criminal Nazi leaders to flee to South America after the war. When in 2020, the Vatican reached an agreement with the communist government in China in order to make good what had been done wrong through one-sided policies in the 20th century, Fox News and the EWTN, the Eternal Word, and the whole Catholic right in the United States and in Europe were outraged and protested widely. The patriarchal gender struggle continued most recently in June 2021 in the religious sphere in the United States, while the Republican Party seemed to have turned fascist and socialism was gaining popularity in the polls, resisted most fanatically by the secular exclusive right-wing populist Fox News and the likewise exclusive right-wing populist Catholic EWTN, which both shared even the same contributor and anchorman, Raymond Arroyo. Women would still not yet be ordained to the priesthood in the patriarchal authoritarian Roman Catholic Church as late as in June 2021, as Jews had already modified their patriarchal attitude and had ordained female rabbis for quite some time, and Protestant churches had given up their patriarchy to a large extent and had ordained female ministers for even much longer. Do I still have some time?
Probably just a few more minutes.
Few more minutes?
Yes.
You say stop. According to Max Horkheimer, the initiator of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, explained in his theory about the Oedipus complex and about the Electra complex, the identification of the boy with the father out of their love for the mother. Freud based his psychoanalysis on the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles in Athens, a chain of gender crimes. The tragedies reflected on the level of the absolute spirit of culture, of art and of religion, namely the Greek religion of fate and beauty, the real struggle of the genders on the level of the objective spirit of the Athenian family, civil society, city-state, and history. According to Aeschylus, Agamemnon, Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife. Atreus killed Thyestes' young children and gave him them as meat. Helen forsook her husband and went to Troy with Paris. Agamemnon, in order to promote the Trojan War, sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia. Aegisthus and Clytemnestra murdered Agamemnon after his return from Troy. Orestes killed Aegisthus and his mother Clytemnestra with the support of his sister Electra. However, for his matricide, Orestes was pursued throughout Greece in revenge by the female spirits, the Erinyes, until he came to Athens, where Athena, who had, according to Greek patriarchal imagination, come out of the head of Zeus, as Eve had come, according to Jewish patriarchal imagination, from the rib of Adam, and atoned for and reconciled Orestes for the price of a patriarchy in which men protected woman and child, and woman served men. Agamemnon represented the arrival of the patriarchy, Clytemnestra the return of matriarchy, and Orestes the re-establishment of patriarchy. According to Sophocles, after Oedipus had returned from his exile, into which he had been sent as a boy by his parents because of an ominous oracle, and after he had solved the riddle of the Sphinx on the marketplace of Theban, and thus had redeemed the city, he killed unconsciously and unintentionally his father when he blocked his way to the city, and then married unconsciously and unintentionally his mother Jocasta, retaking the patriarchal power position of his father. Tiresias, a blind prophet, revealed the gender tragedy. The chorus of Theban elders commented on it. At least since the Axis age, the battle of the sexes waged on under the patriarchy, interrupted admittedly by the armistice of marriage, family, partnership, and friendship. This armistice, however, broke down in the West more and more in higher and higher rates of different expressions and forms of the battle of the sexes, like divorce, adultery, abortion, birth control, homosexuality, lesbianism, shortly, LGBTQ plus communities, which continued to be discriminated against heavily by right-wing Catholics and Southern Baptists up to June 2021 and so on, until they reached in the 20th and 21st century a level never seen before since the late Roman Empire.
All right.
Do I still have a minute?
Yeah, if you got one more minute, that'll work.
Okay, one more paragraph. However, in the view of the DR, that means dialectical ideology, not only Athens was aware of the historical gender struggle, but also Jerusalem. In Jewish history, the struggle of the genders reached its climax with two courageous women. The book of Judith told the story of the defeat of Nebuchadnezzar's army through a woman single-handed assassination of their commander. The book was written about 100 BC. The theme of the book East Esther was similarly the deliverance of the Jewish nation by the actions of a woman. The Hebrew version was probably written about 300 BC. The Hebrew prophet Micah stated concerning the gender conflict in the neighborhood and in the family, put quotation, put no trust in a neighbor, have no confidence in a friend. To the woman who shares your bed, do not open your mouth. For son insults father, daughter defies mother, daughter-in-law defies mother-in-law. A man's enemies are those of his own household. Among them, the best is like a briar, the most honest a hedge of thorn. Today will come their ordeal from the north. Now is the time of their confusion. Rabbi Jesus spoke of the dissension in the family following the prophet Micah. Quotation, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. It is not peace I have come to bring, but a thought. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. Or again, do you suppose that I am here to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. For from now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. The father divided against the son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. According to Jesus, there were men who were castrated, eunuchs in the contemporary Jewish and Roman culture. Quotation, there are eunuchs born that way from their mother's womb. There are eunuchs made by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves that way for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. According to CTRS, only Essenes made themselves into eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God. According to the context, Jesus used the Essenes statement not in order to establish a celibate priesthood, but rather in order to tell divorced people not to get married again. Jesus did this after he had criticized Moses' permission of divorce because the Israelites had not been teachable in spite of the fact that in the beginning it was not so, according to the will of the Creator God in the Genesis. While according to the book Genesis, Sodom was destroyed because of the homosexuality, and while according to the book Leviticus, homosexuals had to be sentenced to death and executed, in spite of the fact that according to the prophet Isaiah, Sodom had been destroyed because its rich women did not share their wealth with the poor. And according to the Jesus teaching, Sodom had been destroyed because of a lack of hospitality towards strangers. In Jesus' view, the man of Sodom could repent and be forgiven easier than the man of Sidon, who did not repent after he had preached to them. Also, Jesus taught, you have learned how it was said, you must love your neighbor and hate your enemy. According to the dialectical ideology, the quotation was from Leviticus 19:18. The enemy to be hated could be inside as well as outside the family. However, the second part of this commandment was not in the written Hebrew law. It was an Aramaic Essene way of saying you do not have to love your enemy. Also, this rule was valid inside as well as outside the family. The Greek tragedies found their climax and their final resolution in the ultimate Christian tragedy, in which the Son, born without the original sin of patricide, redeemed through his own sacrifice the world from his sin and sins. While when Jesus was executed, his mother and his disciple John were present, the rest of the family, his father Joseph and his 4 brothers and his sisters, as well as most of his disciples, were missing. Judas having betrayed him, Peter having denied him 3 times, and all the other disciples having fled after 3 years of intense teaching.